Okay, so before we start, when it comes time for Q&A, of course, I'm going to be handling the questions for you guys here, and I'll bring a microphone to you, so just raise your hand. And then we might take questions from you and then some from the audience. And you will handle that, right? Yeah. Jeff. This is Jeff.
Hello, everyone. We'll begin the meeting now. And I am Jeff Peckrell, part of the Human Rights Working Group. I work with Melvin over there and Dolores quite a bit, and David Heilbronn also here today. And we're really pleased that you joined us in person, those of you who are in the room today. We have about 16 people on the phone on Zoom as well. And for the Q&A part of this, Dolores said that for those of you here in the room, we'll have a microphone and we can give you the microphone to ask your question. For those of you who are on Zoom, please enter your questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring those and we'll be addressing those questions too. So now Dolores is going to, by the way, our topic today, in case you didn't know, is we're going to be talking about the election coming up, specifically and especially the local election, where we have so many initiatives and questions to answer. I found it quite daunting myself to sort through this ballot, and we have a really great person to speak to us about this today, Tim Redmond, who I have been reading for many, many years at the Bay Area Guardian and now at 48 Hills, so I'm really excited to hear his perspectives on all this. And before we get into that, though, Dolores is going to give our land recognition and the Ohlone prayer. So Dolores, would you please do that now?
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning, everybody. Today, we, the members of the First Unitarian Universalist Society of San Francisco, gratefully acknowledge that we are located on the ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples who inhabited what is now the San Francisco Peninsula. The Greater Bay Area is also the ancestral territory of the Miwok, the Yokuts, Patwin, and other Ohlone tribes. Indigenous communities have lived and moved through this area, anthropologists say, for more than 10,000 years. We further recognize that as the original stewards of this land, the Ohlone understood the interconnectedness of all things and maintained harmony with all of nature for millennia. We honor them and their enduring commitment to our Mother Earth. And now we want to introduce you to the editor of 48hills.org, a digital daily newspaper, and he's the former editor of the Bay Guardian. Let's welcome Tim Redmond.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to those of you who are watching us online. You can hear, all right. Make sure everybody can hear me. Generally, I don't have a problem with people hearing me. I generally speak loud enough and fast enough. Okay, so as you all no doubt have seen, the ballot in San Francisco and in the state of California is rather long. That is because we vote on a lot of officials every couple of years, but also San Francisco and the San Francisco voters and San Francisco elected officials have a habit of putting things on the ballot for direct voter approval, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes not so good reasons. When you think about this, the concept of the initiative, the referendum, and the recall goes back to the progressive era in California under Hiram Johnson. And the idea was the state legislature was so corrupt and so controlled by Southern Pacific, particularly Southern Pacific Railroad, that people didn't trust the legislature to get anything done. And when the legislature did do things, they were often terrible. So the idea was, okay, if we can't trust the legislature, let's just go directly to the people. And this was a fine idea in the 1920s, when you did not have $300 million campaigns, with paid signature gatherers making between $10 and $20 a signature to get people to sign for almost anything. You did not have deceptive tactics to get people to sign petitions. You didn't have the kind of things that we're seeing today, which has kind of undermined the direct democracy idea. I mean, during the during the recall of Chesabuddin, for example, I heard somebody called me and told me, and I checked it out, it was true, that there was a tent near the Safeway on Market Street in the Castro that said free COVID tests. And this guy told me, well, he'd just come back from a wedding somewhere, and this was the early days of the pandemic. He's like, you know, I should get a free COVID test, not a bad idea. And he goes in and they swabbed him. And then they said, okay, just sign here and you're all done. And he looked at what he was signing, and it was a petition to recall Chesabuddin. Yeah, this is how bad it has gotten. Right, so we have in the past year recalled the district attorney and recalled 3 members of the school board. And of course, because of the San Francisco City Charter, we have an extraordinarily powerful mayor. And one of the powers of the mayor is if there is a vacancy in any elected office, even the school board, which has nothing to do with the mayor's office. The school board is a separate agency that is not under the mayor. It is not under the executive of San Francisco. The mayor gets to replace that position. Same thing with the community college board, which is a separate state mandated agency that has nothing to do with the mayor's office or the city and county of San Francisco per se. But if there's a vacancy, the mayor gets to appoint. That's just an intro. Mayor London Breed is not on the ballot. Depending on what happens with Proposition H, which we'll talk about in a minute, Mayor London Breed may be on the ballot next year or 2 years from now, or may decide not to run, who knows. However, in many ways, what is on the ballot is going to be a referendum on the mayor and on the direction that she has taken the city. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'll talk about local stuff, and then I'll talk about state stuff. I'm not going to be able to cover every single measure on the state and local ballot in detail, because if I did, we would be here till 2 or 3 in the afternoon, which would be fine. I love to talk about this stuff, but I know people have other things to do. So what I'd really like you to do is keep in mind, if you have any questions, if there's anything that I don't cover or anything that I am not clear about, or if you disagree with me, we can talk about that in the Q&A. Right? I teach journalism classes at USF, and I always tell my students, agreeing with me is not a prerequisite to passing this class. Okay, so what's on the local ballot? Well, one of the themes that we're seeing on the local ballot that is very significant is the question of the future of housing in San Francisco. I was speaking not too long ago to a campaign consultant, a person who's paid to run political campaigns, who is very experienced in political campaigns in San Francisco and has often run campaigns for progressive candidates. Oh, all right, louder. Who said to me, the YIMBYs have won the day. The YIMBYs have won the argument. And there's no point in trying to run a campaign that doesn't say we all favor building more housing of all sorts and letting developers upzone everything, because that's the YIMBYs have won the argument. The YIMBYs being people who, it stands for Yes in My Backyard, which is actually a faulty term. We can talk more about that later. The YIMBYs basically believe that if we allow developers to build a lot more housing in San Francisco, eventually prices will come down. Right. Now, we hear this as, and this is one of my favorite phrases, and you'll see this a lot in campaigns, San Francisco needs to build more housing. Senator Scott Wiener says, we need to build more housing at all levels. That's a fundamentally flawed statement, because San Francisco doesn't build any housing. Right? San Francisco hasn't built any housing since the 60s, when the federal government gave cities money to build public housing. Private developers build housing. And there's 2 types of private developers who build housing. One is the for-profit private developers who build housing only if they can make a profit, and only if the return on their investment is high enough to satisfy the international speculative capital that pays for this. You know, the days when a small-time developer would go to Bank of America and take out a mortgage loan and buy a site and build a couple of houses. That's not what's happening anymore. The housing that's being built in San Francisco is being financed by real estate investment trusts, by insurance companies, by international capital. And we all know international capital goes where the return is highest. And in, most of the past 10 years or so, the highest return was building luxury condos in San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, and Vancouver, BC. So that's where the money went. Now, a lot of this new luxury housing was never occupied. Nobody ever moved in, because a lot of that money the people who ended up buying these condos were just looking for a safe place to park their money. And a lot of them were from out of the country. So the YIMBY argument that we need to build more housing essentially means we, the city, needs to change the zoning laws, which is the only thing we have control over, to allow private developers to build more housing. And the idea that this is going to bring prices down, in my opinion, has no basis in fact. It's never happened and it never will, right? The nonprofit developers who build housing build subsidized affordable housing. No nonprofit in San Francisco can build affordable housing units today without government subsidies. The costs of housing, cost of construction are very high. The cost of materials have basically quadrupled since the beginning of the pandemic. It's very expensive to build a housing unit in San Francisco. And therefore, the government, whether at the federal, the state, or the local level, has to come in and make up the difference between the actual cost of construction and the rent levels at which the unit can be rented if it's going to be affordable to the San Francisco workforce. Right? So that's who builds housing. And those are really two different visions for how we build housing in San Francisco, how housing gets built in San Francisco. Right? Vision number one is give private developers more free rein, and they will build so much housing that, like any other good, the prices will come down. We all know that, in theory, if there's a shortage of gasoline, prices go up. If there's a glut of gasoline, prices come down. We know ourselves from reality that that is not true, that oil companies are making record profits right now, that supply and demand doesn't always work. It certainly doesn't work in the San Francisco housing market. Okay, so I'm mentioning this because several of the key elements on the ballot involve this question. All right, we will, as voters, elect 5 new members of the Board of Supervisors, or re-elect some existing members of the Board of Supervisors. This is the even year, districts 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. Right. Of those, District 2 is not competitive. Catherine Stefani, who is the most conservative member of the Board of Supervisors, is going to be re-elected in District 2. For those of you who live in District 2, there's really no competition. 4 and 6 are highly competitive races I'll talk about in a minute. District 8, Raphael Mandelman will be reelected in District 8. That is not a competitive race, for better and for worse. I actually think Rafi could have used a competitor from the left to hold him to account, but that hasn't happened. And District 10, Shaman Walton will be reelected, which I think is great. I think Shaman has been an excellent supervisor, my personal opinion. So the 2 competitive districts are 4 and 6, and they will determine, to a great extent, control of the Board of Supervisors. Because remember, the mayor has made no secret of her agenda and has not hesitated to use the veto if she disagrees with things the Board of Supervisors have done. So in order to have a veto-proof progressive majority on the Board of Supervisors, you need 8, right? And if the progressives lose districts 6 and 4, it will be much more difficult to do that. All right, let's talk about District 4 for a second, and then I'll come back to some of the ballot initiatives. In District 4, we have Supervisor Gordon Marr, who has been a supervisor for the past 4 years, has a strong background in labor, and has been part of the Progressive Coalition pretty much from the beginning. He is being challenged by Joel Engardio. Joel Engardio actually ran in District 7 last time around and lost to Myrna Melgar. The redistricting has now included him in District 4. Now, let me just talk about this for 1 second because it's important. Like every other jurisdiction, the city of San Francisco redraws lines for supervisor every 10 years to correspond with changes in the census. This year's process was about as corrupt as I can imagine it being. There is no question that the mayor, was pulling the strings, and that the mayor intentionally said, we want to redraw the lines to make it harder for progressives to get elected. Originally, the goal was to take Potrero Hill out of D10 and move more of the Portola into D10 to make it harder for Shimon Walton to get reelected. That got shot down at the last minute. But District 4 was moved to the south, and the parts of District 4 that were closer to the Haight and the inner Sunset were moved out. So District 4 is now a more conservative district. They took the Tenderloin out of District 6 and moved more of the new parts of Soma with all of that new high-rise housing into District 6 to make District 6 a more conservative district. All right. Now, that makes it challenging for Gordon Marr, who frankly has always been more progressive than his district tends to support. But he's been a district supervisor who has tried really hard to work with the constituencies in the district. And it is a district, it is a district with a lot of union members in it. And he's always been a strong labor guy. Joel Engardio is running 100% on the YIMBY platform. And I will say this for Joel, he is very straightforward and honest about what he believes. And he says he believes very strongly that we need more law and order. That is, he supported the recall of Chesapeake. And law and order, by the way, in the terms that we're now hearing about it from the new DA and from some candidates, basically means more incarceration. And that's what law and order means. It means arresting people and putting them in jail. The district attorney has talked repeatedly about the solution to the drug problems in the Tenderloin and the open air drug dealing is to arrest more people and put them in jail. And she has tried to make sure, she has pushed judges to hold people in jail without bail pre-trial, with only limited success, because actually the judges in San Francisco are not fond of that. And by the way, the sheriff has made it very clear that he doesn't really have the staff to hold a lot more people in the jail, particularly since we are still in the middle of a global pandemic. And if there's a place where you're likely to get COVID, it's a jail, right? So the judges aren't going for this. Nevertheless, Joel is talking about that, and he's also talking about how he has been very much a part of the YIMBY movement for years, and he's talking about how we need to upzone the west side of town to allow more development and allow more developers to build housing, and then prices will come down. Interestingly, at a hearing on this recently, when they're talking about upzoning the west side of town, which, by the way, the city has already done and the state has already done. It is now perfectly legal to build 4-unit buildings on virtually any lot in San Francisco. However, as Supervisor Mandelman, who has been pushing this for a long time, admitted when this came up before the Board of Supervisors, it's not going to happen because you don't make enough money building 4-unit buildings. And by the way, everything in San Francisco is already built out. So in San Francisco, there's not a lot of vacant land. If you want to build new buildings in San Francisco, you have to tear down existing buildings, which would mean if we're going to build a lot of new 4-unit buildings in the Sunset, it means demolishing all of the single-family houses that are there, which I'm not sure people are really going to go for when the bulldozers start coming in. At any rate, the finances don't make sense, right? We're not going to see those 4-unit buildings being built. But as Gordon Marr pointed out, he said, you know, we did this on Terraval. There's a lot where there was a single-family house, and it was torn down, and they built 3 new units, 3 new condos. And the single family house sold for about $1.3 million or something. And they tore it down and they built 3 condos, all of which are selling for $1.3 million. Right? So the developer made a lot of money, but the price of the housing did not come down. Right? So Gordon, while he is not opposing the upzoning and he's not opposing allowing more housing, particularly along transit corridors, which everybody thinks is a good idea. Gordon, I think, understands that and has shown that this is not a magical solution to solving the housing crisis. All right. Now, in District 6, Matt Haney was the supervisor for District 6, and again, ran as a strong progressive, was part of the progressive coalition in San Francisco until he decided he wanted to be in the state assembly and immediately switched positions and started taking up the YIMBY line on housing. And he ended up getting elected to the state assembly. And the mayor, who has the power to appoint, and one of the things that I said to Matt when he was running, I said, you know, we're going to lose D6. You're going to get elected to the state. If you get elected to the state assembly, we will lose D6. The mayor will put in a much more conservative person. And he said, no, don't worry. If I get elected, the mayor's going to appoint Honey Mahogany my chief of staff. And if not, I'll help her run and she'll get elected no matter what. Well, that didn't happen. The mayor appointed Matt Dorsey, who is a former spokesperson for City Attorney Dennis Herrera, but for the past 2 years has been the chief communications person for the San Francisco Police Department. And refers to the San Francisco police chief as someone who's very interested in reform. I have not seen that actually on the ground. But Matt, again, very honestly says, I'm a YIMBY. I am 100% in favor of allowing developers to build a lot more housing in San Francisco with the idea that then prices will come down. Honey Mahogany, who was chief of staff to Matt Haney when he was the supervisor from that district, is running against Matt Dorsey, who is the appointed incumbent, and that is going to be a very close race. Those two races will determine whether the mayor will have more control over the Board of Supervisors. Now, let me shift on the housing theme for a second because it's really important. There are two measures on the ballot that address housing, and those are Propositions D and E. Right? Proposition D is the YIMBY measure. Proposition D would give developers ability to bypass a lot of the normal rules, a lot of the normal community input to build housing that is, quote, affordable to people who make 140% of median income. Right? 140% of median income means about $130,000 a year. And housing that is by federal standards affordable to people who make 140% of median income is market rate housing. That housing rent, that's housing that rents for $3,500 a month, which is what developers are getting, what private landlords are getting for a one-bedroom apartment in much of San Francisco anyway. So essentially what this does is it gives developers the ability to save money by bypassing community input and getting essentially what they call buy right. You can just walk into the planning department and sign a piece of paper and get a permit to build. Even though that housing will be, much of that housing can be priced at what is currently market rate. Right, so when they talk about I don't know if I get texts from the Yes on D campaign. Is anybody getting these texts? I'm getting these texts all the time. Build more affordable housing. And it's actually funny. I will tell you this. Somebody on the text messaging has confused my phone number with my daughter's, who is also registered to vote at my house, although she's in college now. So the message says, "Hi, Vivian. We're hoping that you're going to vote for Prop D." And of course, I cannot help it. I respond. It's like, Proposition D is a developer scam. And I just think, oh, my poor daughter. She's off in college in Connecticut. She has no idea what was being said in her name to these people who are texting. Anyway, Proposition D follows the idea that if we let developers build, eventually prices will come down, and that we should in fact give developers a pass to build housing that essentially is market rate. Proposition E would in fact streamline actual affordable housing for people who are actually in the San Francisco workforce and make that easier to build. Now, the reality is, the state has mandated that San Francisco, it says, when you read about this, it says San Francisco has to build 84,000 more housing units. San Francisco is not going to build any housing units. That's not how it works. What San Francisco can do is rezone the city and make it easier for developers to build 84,000 units, which they are not going to build under current market conditions anyway. All right. There are 50,000 units of housing in San Francisco that are entitled and shovel ready that are not being built because they can't get the financing. All right. So, but on this, as part of that, about 30,000 of those units are supposed to be below market rate. San Francisco, according to the state, over the next 8 years, is supposed to find ways to create 30,000 new units of below market rate housing. The price tag for that at current prices is $19 billion. I have yet to find anyone at City Hall, from the mayor's office on down, who has any idea where the city is going to come up with the $19 billion that is required for the affordable housing that the state wants, the state is mandating us to build. Right? It's not there. All these people who are talking about meeting the state regional housing needs assessment goals are ignoring the big factor, which is, where's the money going to come from? Where's the financing for the market rate housing, but also where's the money for the affordable housing going to come from? The reality is, even if we streamline affordable housing, which Prop E would do, we also have to look at what the city and what cities around the country are going to need is a radical influx of cash from the state and the federal government. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. Gavin Newsom had a $100 billion surplus this year. That would have paid for enough affordable housing to probably house every homeless person in California. Instead, he's giving me a gas rebate. He's sending me money to offset the cost of gas, even though I hardly ever drive. Right? I said, if I get that, if he actually sends me a gift card with, several $100s on it, I'm just going to bring it down and give it to the Coalition on Homelessness, because I don't need a gas rebate, since they say I might drive 10 miles a month. Right? Anyway, that is Proposition C and Proposition D, which are extremely important, in part because they deal with housing and in part because they send a message. If Prop E passes, it sends a message that people in San Francisco have not all bought into the YIMBY narrative, that narrative has not won, and that people still understand that letting private developers build isn't necessarily going to bring prices down. Okay, let me talk quickly about a couple of the other candidates, and then I'll move on to statewide stuff. There are 3 candidates running for district attorney. There is a district attorney race on the ballot because the previous district attorney, Chesa Boudin, was recalled in a campaign funded in large part by Republicans and big Republican donors, putting out the lie that crime was up under Chesa Boudin. Crime was not up under Chesa Boudin. Crime during the pandemic moved. Pre-pandemic, there were a lot of car break-ins in San Francisco, right? Mostly on the Embarcadero, near Fisherman's Wharf, near Union Square, places where tourists were. Tourists would come to San Francisco, and they would leave their suitcases, their backpacks, their laptops, whatever, in their car while they went to Fisherman's Wharf or went to have lunch or shopped at Union Square, and people would break in and steal the stuff. This has been happening for a long time in San Francisco, and it's not a good thing. In many of those places, there are signs warning people not to leave stuff in their car. People leave stuff in their car. As some of you may remember, not a few years ago, a federal ICE agent who was traveling from San Diego to Washington for a conference left his loaded Glock in the back seat of the car with a round in the chamber and 16 in the clip, and a homeless person found it in a garbage can, and it went off and ricocheted and killed a woman. Some of you remember the Steinley case. People still leave stuff in their cars. Nevertheless, when the pandemic hit, all the tourists stopped coming to San Francisco, just like that. But the people who break into cars didn't stop breaking into cars. They just moved into people's neighborhoods and started breaking it. So it felt like crime was up. Actually, crime just moved. And the district attorney really can't do anything about car break-ins because the cops arrest people in less than 1% of car break-ins. It's really, it's fast, it happens really quickly, and the cops can't get there. And so there are no arrests. And if there's no arrest, the district attorney can't do anything about it. Nevertheless, Chesa Boudin was recalled. The mayor, who has the authority to replace any elected official, replaced him with Brooke Jenkins, who was one of the leading people organizing the recall. Right. Brooke Jenkins is now the DA, and as I say, basically has declared that we are returning to the war on drugs. She is being challenged by 2 people. One is John Hamasaki, who is a defense lawyer and a former police commissioner. I found when he was on the police commission, he was exceptionally good at holding the chief accountable and demanding answers from the police department. He was very, very good at it. One of the best I've seen on the police commission in all of my years at doing that. He is running a campaign to be a progressive DA. And he basically has said that the war on drugs and that mass incarceration has failed us as a society and we should not go back to it. Right. The third candidate is Joe Alioto Veronese, who has a name you all recognize. His mom was a San Francisco supervisor. His grandfather was mayor of San Francisco. Joe is running, if anything, to the right of Brooke Jenkins. As a very conservative prosecutor, he's also, Brooke Jenkins and John Hamasaki have spent their lives in criminal law. Joe Elioto Veronese was a police officer when he was young, but has never been a prosecutor. He's never done criminal law, which isn't required for the job, but is interesting. Right. So those are some of the key races on the ballot. And let me talk a little bit more about some of the other ballot measures. Okay. The ones that are really important. And one of them that I think is really important, just making sure I got all my numbers right here. One of the ones that I think is really important is Proposition O. Proposition O, O, as in Omicron. But no, it's not, I shouldn't compare it to the virus. Proposition O is a very good thing. Right? Let me just talk for a brief moment about City College of San Francisco. Right? City College is one of the most important institutions in the city. And City College has historically provided not only two-year degrees and two-year degrees that allow transfer to other institutions, but a wide range of adult education, right? City College is where people have gone to learn English as a second language. It is where people have gone to learn what they need to learn to become a citizen of the United States if they come here as an immigrant. It is where people go to learn skills. It is where people go to learn, for example, culinary skills. It is where people go to learn mechanical skills. Right? It is where people go to learn skills that will help them get a better job. The state of California no longer wants to fund that. The state of California only wants to fund junior colleges whose purpose is to get someone an AA degree that they can transfer to Cal State or to the University of California. That's what the state wants to fund. That has been a function of City College, and an important one, but by no means the only function. And in order for City College to continue to provide all of the classes that it has provided, the people of San Francisco are going to have to pay for it. That's just the reality. Right? The reality is the state is not going to pay to keep the type of city college that we've always had. So basically, the people of San Francisco are going to have to step up. And I've been saying this for years. The people of San Francisco are going to have to step up and spend $30 or $40 million a year to keep City College going, to make up for the fact that the state is no longer funding the traditional role of San Francisco City College. Prop O is a parcel tax that would do that. Right? In the pantheon of taxes, progressive income taxes are the best, sales taxes are the worst, property taxes are somewhere in between. Right? Parcel taxes are not a perfect method of taxation, right? Because it's a tax on every parcel, which means that in theory with parcel taxes, you know, the big high-rise downtown pays the same amount per parcel as I do with my little tiny house in Bernal Heights. This is a progressive parcel tax. They've actually set it up so large commercial property owners pay slightly more in taxes than homeowners do. The average homeowner in San Francisco will pay $150 a year in parcel taxes to save City College. Right? And frankly, and I would include myself in this, the average homeowner in San Francisco is doing very, very well under Prop 13. Right? I bought my house 22 years ago. The property taxes are set at what my house cost 22 years ago, which is frankly a lot less than it's worth now. Right? I can afford $150 a year to save City College, and so can most homeowners in San Francisco. But more than that, most large commercial operators are doing even better than the homeowners under Prop 13. Donald Trump, who owns half of the Bank of America building, is saving, you know, several $1 million a year in property taxes that would otherwise go to the general fund under Prop 13, just on that building. Right? Prop O would raise the money necessary to save City College. And I just want to show you this for a second. Right? This is what I just got in the mail. I'm working hard to live within my budget, and the city should too. Now is not the time to raise taxes. I'm voting no on propositions M and O. I'll come back to M in a second. Lily, SF resident. Now, I don't know who Lily is. Here she is with her groceries. But unless Lily is a large commercial landlord, she's not going to pay any taxes, or she's going to pay very little. All right. If Lily is a tenant, she's not going to pay any taxes. If Lily is a homeowner, she's going to pay $150 a year more in taxes, which is what Lily is saving if she bought her house more than 3 days ago on Prop 13. All right. So I think to myself, who on earth would be greedy enough and callous enough to spend money trying to stop a parcel tax for City College? Well, let's just take a look. The California Apartment Association, the San Francisco Apartment Association, Trinity Management Services, the San Francisco Board of Realtors, the California Association of Realtors. This is the big landlords who are trying to shoot this down. It's frankly disgusting that they are doing this. All right. They're also going after Proposition M, and they're trying to link Prop O and Prop M, although they are very different measures. Proposition M would place a tax on apartments in buildings with 3 or more units that have been vacant for more than a year. There are today, according to the city's budget and legislative analyst and the controller's office, 60,000 vacant apartments in San Francisco. Think about that. The state is coming at us with a hammer saying we have to allow developers to build 84,000 more housing units to bring prices down. There are 60,000 vacant units in San Francisco right now. Some of them vacant because they were never bought with the intent of anyone living in them. 30% of the units, my count, 30% of the units in these new high-rise buildings are vacant and are owned by people who have addresses outside of San Francisco and are not being rented out. They're pied-à-terres, or they're just investment properties. I don't know why other units are being held off the market, but they are, and Prop M would attempt to encourage landlords to put them on the market with a tax. And if the landlords keep them off the market, that tax can be used for more affordable housing. All right. I'm going to get to the state in 1 second. I just want to be sure that I'm not missing anything really important on the San Francisco ballot. Oh, the Great Highway and Golden Gate Park, I and J. You all know during the pandemic, the city closed JFK Drive to cars and closed the Great Highway to cars because no one was commuting anywhere anyway, and we needed more places for outdoor recreation. This was very popular with bicyclists and with people who walk and take their kids there. Closing JFK Drive to cars has been on the agenda of the Bicycle Coalition and others for many, many, many years. Right? There are plenty of other places to park in Golden Gate Park. The city, after the pandemic, well, the pandemic's still happening, but after the worst of the pandemic, decided to keep the closure permanent and to close the Great Highway on weekends to cars. This is an example of the initiative process. There are 2 ballot measures on the ballot. Prop I would reopen JFK Drive and the Great Highway to cars. Prop J would put voter approval on the current situation. Now, I'm not sure this should be on the ballot in the first place, but it is. I am sympathetic to the folks, including Supervisor Shimon Walton, who say that people in Bayview can't take the bus to Golden Gate Park because you can't get there on the bus. And people have to drive if they want to take their families to Golden Gate Park. I agree. You can't park in the garage right now because the garage costs $30 a day. I recognize that there is some what Shimon calls recreational redlining going on here. I recognize that there are class issues and that this is not as simple as the Bicycle Coalition sometimes wants it to sound. Right? Nevertheless, there also happens to be a measure on the ballot, which I hope I get right now, which is Prop N. Prop N would allow the city to take over the garage at Golden Gate Park, which is currently run by this bizarre Golden Gate Park Concourse Authority that was set up when they dug the hole and put the garage in there, which is primarily for patrons of the museum. If the city can take that over, we can lower the parking rates, right? Which is the solution to all of this, right? Is to let people from Bayview pay $2 and park in the garage, which is empty on the weekends anyway, and people could park there, right? I'm also sympathetic to the people who say that when you closed the Great Highway, it moved all the traffic onto 48th Avenue and 47th Avenue, and I understand the problem there. The reality is that in 10 years, the part of the Great Highway south of Slit Boulevard is going to collapse anyway, and is going to have to be closed anyway. And I fear that much of the current Great Highway north of Sloat Boulevard is going to be underwater in 10 years anyway. Right? I'm not sure that leaving that road open to cars is going to be a long-term solution anyway because of climate change. All right. So those are the things that are on the ballot. I'm going to run out of time, so let me move on to the state. Okay. And the first thing I want to say about the state is Gavin Newsom will be reelected governor, but Gavin Newsom has clearly decided he's running for president of the United States. Right? That is why, for example, Gavin Newsom is against Prop 30, which would raise taxes on very rich people. I'll talk about that in a second. Right? Gavin Newsom has taken a number of positions that have moved him much closer to the center-right, because he is clearly looking at the White House. We used to say when he was mayor, it's like he spends too much time watching the West Wing. Gavin has always wanted to be president of the United States. Now I think although he denies this, it's very clear that that is what he is doing. And he is reaching out to people and trying to set the groundwork. I think he believes that there's a chance that Joe Biden won't run again, and that there's a chance that the polls will show that Kamala Harris is not popular. And that is in part because she is Joe Biden's vice president, has little to do with Kamala Harris. Joe Biden, by the way, has not given her anything to do that would increase her popularity. Instead, he's put her in charge of immigration policy, which is basically a loser if you want to be popular, right? Because no matter what you do, you're going to make some people mad. At any rate, Gavin will get reelected. He is thinking about the White House, and I think that's really undermines a lot of what is going on with Gavin Newsom. Okay. There are a bunch of things on the state ballot beyond the elected offices. And the elected offices, frankly, again, the Democrats are all going to win all of the elective offices on the statewide ballot. Some of that is for better and some of it is for worse. I suppose it's better having all these Democrats than having Republicans in any of these offices. But it's not really, there's no point in really arguing about that, whether any of us vote or not. The Democrats are going to win all the statewide offices. Okay. Prop 1 is a measure that would enshrine in the California Constitution reproductive rights and the right to an abortion. It is important for two reasons. One, abortion has been legal in California since long before Roe v. Wade. And I suspect that abortion will be legal in California for a long time to come. However, you never know. Remember, Arnold Schwarzenegger got elected governor of California, right? Weird things happen with the state, right? Arnold Schwarzenegger got elected governor of California. Now, I don't know what Arnold Schwarzenegger's position on abortion is, but it is possible that we could get a Republican governor. It is possible that sometime in the future, since the Dobbs decision has returned abortion rights to the state, that some state governor or legislators could try to overturn the right to choose. Prop 1 would put it in the Constitution. The second thing that's important is if Prop 1 gets 55% of the vote, oh yeah, that's great. Prop 1 needs to get 70% of the vote. It needs to send a national message, right? That reproductive rights, that a woman's right to control her own body is extremely important and very popular among voters, right? So it's going to pass. It needs to pass overwhelmingly. Prop 26 and 27. You've seen a lot of TV ads. You cannot watch television in California today without seeing ads on this. Many of them directly contradictory to each other, many of them very confusing. It's not clear what these are doing. Both sides are spending roughly $300 million on this. This shouldn't be on the ballot. This is what we pay our state legislators to figure out with public hearings and a lot of discussion, right? This is about online gambling, right? This is about sportsbook. This is about my ability to go on my phone and bet on football games, all right? I got no problem with gambling. I really don't. I got no problem with sports gambling. I'm not a gambler myself. I don't go for it, but I'm fine. I don't really have a moral or political problem with gambling. I've always supported the rights of California tribes to have casinos on their sovereign land. I have absolutely no problem with that. As my son says, this is silly. Everybody's already doing it anyway, right? People are already going online and gambling on their phone on sports. But these two measures were both written by specific interest groups with specific things in mind that, and both of them have serious problems, right? Prop 26 would benefit the 5 existing large tribes that already have casinos, right? And it would basically say, yes, you can bet on sports, which you can't now in California, but it's got to be in a tribal casino. You have to actually go to the tribal casino and you can put your bet on whatever sports activities you want. You can bet on the San Francisco Giants to win next year's World Series at probably 100 to 1. Right. But it has to be at a tribal casino. This, of course, does nothing for the numerous tribes that do not have casinos. Right. Prop 27 claims that some of the money will go to the tribes that do not have casinos. Right. Remember how the California lottery was going to provide all this money for the schools? I'm very dubious. There were people walking around with signs saying, you know, gathering petitions saying, help homeless people in California. Because a small percentage of the Prop 27 revenue, if it passes, is supposedly going for homeless programs. Again, I'm very dubious. Prop 27 is financed by 2 or 3 large online betting operations, DraftKings, I don't know, my kids know this, I don't remember the names of the other ones, right? That basically want to make it legal for, as I say, for me to go on my phone and bet on sports, right? Which again, I don't have any problem with. But what this does, of course, is it hurts the tribes. And it benefits 3 large out of the state interests that are going to make a lot of money on online gambling. Now, the only thing you can say about this, and this is what I generally say about things like gambling, prostitution, drugs, it's happening anyway. The state might as well get a cut. And the state will get revenue from these 2 measures. Right? My personal, I voted no on both of them. Right? I just don't think this is the way to address this problem. I think we need to have a much more subtle and nuanced discussion about how we do online gambling in California, how we tax it, and who gets the benefits. And since both of these were written by one specific group that's going to get all the benefits, I just don't think either one of them makes a lot of sense. Okay, Prop 30, let me talk about for a minute. Right? Gavin Newsom is on TV saying, vote no on Prop 30. Has anybody seen this? I will admit I do watch sports on TV, although I don't gamble on sports. I watch sports on TV. And I've been watching the baseball playoffs. But in between Prop 26 and Prop 27, I keep seeing our dear governor's face coming on, vote no on 30. It's a special interest, this by Lyft. All right. Prop 30 would raise taxes on the wealthiest Californians, on people with incomes of more than $2 million a year, right, to pay for things like wildfire protection and some environmental protections. Okay. It would help subsidize electric vehicles for people in California. Now, I'm all in favor of that. I think electric vehicles are a great idea. They're too expensive. Subsidizing electric vehicles makes an awful lot of sense to me. If we can transform the electric grid so it's not all, so we're not generating the electricity we're using for our electric cars with fossil fuels. Nevertheless, my son, who some of you know because he used to come to these forums with me, my son is now getting his master's in environmental science and engineering at the University of Michigan. And he tells me that, in fact, beginning to end, soup to nuts, electric cars are better. Even considering that some of the energy is fossil fuels, we still should go to electric cars. All right, I believe him. Right? The problem is, Lyft put a lot of money into this. Why did Lyft put money into this? Because at some point in the next 10 years, the state of California is going to say that rideshare companies have to use electric vehicles. And since a lot of the Lyft drivers can't afford an electric vehicle, Lyft and Uber and those folks are going to have to pay their drivers to subsidize the electric vehicles. Under Prop 30, the state will take that off of their plate. So yes, Lyft has put up, what, $30–40 million to promote Prop 30. So I actually have a serious problem with Uber and Lyft. I think they destroyed the taxi industry. They operated illegally. They violated the law for many years. And, you know, in San Francisco, Mayor Ed Lee let them, and then they got state permission, whatever, right? When I thought about Prop 30, I thought about my favorite economist, Thomas Piketty. I don't know if any of you have read Thomas Piketty's Capital in the 21st Century. It's a brilliant book. It's kind of hard to read. What I tell my students is Piketty's book is about 750 pages, but you only have to read the first 100. Because in the first 100, he makes his case, and then in the next 700, he proves it. And trust me, I read the whole thing, he proves it. Right. But what Piketty says is in our society today, taxing wealthy people and taking their money away is good no matter what you do with it. Right? He basically says, if you tax the rich and throw the money in the ocean, we're better off because it reduces inequality. Right? Prop 30 taxes the rich. All right. I think most of what Prop 30 does is actually a good thing. But if you're concerned that this is going to help Lyft with their electric cars, Piketty would say, Piketty is in Paris, he's not here. But I think if I could get him on the phone and explain Prop 30 to him, he would say, vote for it, it taxes the rich. All right. Let's see. I am almost out of time. So maybe what I'll do is I'll stop here. And I will take questions and go over anything that I did not talk about.
Okay, anybody? Is this working? Is this working?
Well, I'll do the question we got on Zoom. There was only one. It's kind of a comment. It's about Prop O. What about the argument that City College has failed to adjust its budget so that it remains solvent and faced possible loss of accreditation? The existing parcel tax that was renewed in 2016 did not stabilize the college's finances. Why give City College more money before it gets its act together?
Okay, this is one of the arguments that is in the ballot handbook that I have seen, and it is an argument that is a powerful argument. City College, their finances are a mess. They've gone through, 6 chancellors in the last 10 years or whatever. Why should we give them more money? The reason their finances are in a mess is because we haven't given them enough money. All right, that's really simple. I agree that the current trustees, and I'm saying this not as 48 Hills, which cannot endorse candidates, I'm saying this as Tim Redmond personally. I believe that the current members of the Board of Trustees have not done enough to fight back against this ridiculous state idea that we're not going to fund anything except junior college education. Right? The trustees need to be screaming. They need to be up in Sacramento. They need to be making a huge fuss. This needs to change. Right? But in the meantime, in order for City College to live within its means, it has had to lay off more than 100 tenured faculty. Right? We have had to cut. There are 300 people on the waiting list right now for English 1, which you need to take before you can get your AA degree at City College. Right? The way the state funds City College, this money isn't being wasted. This is money that is in the classrooms. Right? And I've been saying, as I say, I have been saying for several years now that the only way that the $30 to $40 million that City College needs to make up for the state money that is not coming in because the state doesn't want to fund adult education and junior college education is going to have to come from the taxpayers of San Francisco. So the Bay Guardian endorsed Susan Solomon, Anita Martinez, and Vic Chung for City College Board. 3 new faces. I hope they get elected, and I hope they help turn this around. But, it always frustrates me when people say, why should we give the city more money? We haven't solved the homeless problem. Well, we haven't solved the homeless problem because we don't have the money to do it. Remember that $19 billion? Right? If Gavin Newsom gave the county of San Francisco $19 billion to build affordable housing, we would not have as much of a homeless crisis. Right? If we could adequately fund City College, we're not going to see them constantly being in a state of financial crisis. So I understand that argument, and I've heard it, and I've read it in the ballot handbook, and that's one of the big challenges that we're going to have to face in this campaign, is people are going to say, well, they haven't done a good job managing the money that they have. They don't have enough money. That's the problem.
Hi, Tim. My name is Art Persico.
Hi, Art.
Hi. I have a question about Mayor Breed. Isn't she vulnerable to a challenge from the left when she runs for re-election?
Okay,
And
go
if,
ahead.
and if so, who do you know who's interested in running, or who would you say you'd like to see run? And secondly, what would the progressive agenda be that person would run on if you were advising that candidate?
Sure. Number one, if you look at the polling, London Breed is very unpopular right now. Right? She is the chief executive of a city that has an awful lot of problems, and she is very vulnerable. Now, I didn't mention Prop H, so let me talk about Prop H for a second, because this feeds into Art's question. All right. Proposition H is a measure that would shift the mayor's race and the supervisor races, all the things we're voting on this fall, to presidential election years. Excuse me, not this fall. Wouldn't change the supervisor races. It would change the mayor's race, the city attorney's race, the sheriff's race, the things that we vote on in off-year elections to presidential election years. That would roughly double the turnout in these races in San Francisco. The turnout in a mayor's race year is typically 60%, 50 to 60% of what it is in a presidential year. This would have higher turnout. Now, I have many friends in the progressive world who say that doesn't necessarily mean we'll elect more progressive candidates. Nevertheless, higher voter turnout is generally a good thing. If this passes, London Breed will get an extra year on her term. She will not be up next year. She'll be up the year after on the presidential election. Either way, I believe she's very vulnerable. No one at this point has come forward and announced their intent to run against her. What would be a platform to run against her? Well, if I were advising the person, I would talk about, number one, the systemic corruption that has happened at City Hall while she was mayor. I would talk about how she has done very little to address the homeless crisis. I would talk about how, in fact, during the COVID pandemic, she opposed using federal money to rent hotel rooms for homeless people. I would talk about how we need to spend more, not less, on affordable housing. I would talk about the wealth gap and the continued structural inequality in San Francisco. There's a lot of things that someone could talk about. We do at this point, we have not heard from any candidate who's interested in running. I would honestly, and again, I'm saying this just as myself, this is just Tim Redmond speaking to you here. I would love to see Shaman Walton run for mayor. I think he'd be a great candidate and a great mayor. He has given no indication that he wants to. This is just me saying this, and I think that he could win. I don't know who else is out there. It's a year is a long time in politics. 2 years is a very long time. But the reality is, if someone's going to run against London Breed and it's going to be next year, they're going to have to start pretty soon.
Hi, Lori Lai, and I just wanted to understand the Asian vote, and I think what do you think the impact will be in this coming election?
Well, that's a very, very good question, and I believe that the Asian vote in San Francisco, like the Latinx vote and like the LGBT vote, is not monolithic. I think that the Asian vote will definitely help Gordon Marr in D4. Gordon Marr has always had strong Asian support and is running against a white guy. So I think that that will be a significant impact. I don't know the impact of the Asian vote on some of these other measures. And I don't think it's monolithic. I think that there are probably Asian voters in District 4 who will vote for Joe Longardio because he's talking about being more tough on crime. Just as there are Asian voters in District 4 who will vote for Gordon Marr because they like having an Asian representative. I don't know. I mean, what do you think the impact of the Asian vote is going to be? I think I worry when we talk about the Asian vote the same way when we talk, we used to talk about a lot the gay vote, the LGBTQ plus vote. There's a significant number of Asian voters in San Francisco, and they don't all vote the same way. And feel free to disagree with me. This is, that is what it seems to me.
Hi, my name's Wendy Kaufman. I'm a teacher at City College of San Francisco, and I've been there. This is my 40th year. And I apologize in advance that I may not be asking a question, but I want to address what came up about City College earlier. And I want to say that I agree wholeheartedly with everything Tim said, but I think I would have centered the leadership question a lot more because, and maybe I am disagreeing with you, but it's never been about the money. City College has been under a political attack since the accreditation attack in 2012. And of course, money helps every problem, but it's the leadership that's been the problem. It's the trustees that have not led the school in a way to make it a true community college instead of the junior college that they should have been fighting these state policies. So I guess the answer is that you can't endorse individual candidates, but
48 Hills can't endorse individual candidates, but the Bay Guardian can.
okay. So I just want to emphasize how important it is to change the leadership, and that the slate that's running against the incumbents is who you should support, which is Anita Martinez, Susan Solomon, Vic Chung, and then for the 2-year seat, Adolfo, I forgot his name. So.
Curtis. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I apologize that this isn't really a question. I hate it when people get up at these forums and just like spout their thing, but City College is so important. And the real important thing on the ballot is changing the leadership. And vote for Prop 02.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm in favor of both. Prop and changing the leadership. As I said, I have been very frustrated, and some of the folks on the City College Board are longtime friends of mine, and I respect them, but I've been very frustrated by their failure to stand up to this ridiculous state funding policy.
I have a question to ask regarding police, period.
Yeah.
I live in the city in a prime area. In terms of what I hear about is how well it is working in terms of New York and the involvement that the police have by being available to the communities in terms of presence, working with the young people in a positive way. Is there a total lack of funding ever applied to the similar reasons for having a police presence in San Francisco? Because I truly, other than occasionally seeing a car going like that down the street, are they ever anywhere available to help where they are just needed for just almost routine things, whether it's break-ins where a businessman that I know said there's no point of even calling them because by the time they would even show up, there's nothing they can do anymore for whatever reason you've called them. In a positive sense, is it lack of funding, lack of availability of the bodies themselves? What makes it such a vacuum presence in terms?
Very good question. Very good question. I believe that while Chesabuddin was district attorney, the police refused to do their jobs because they wanted to hurt Chesabuddin. And the reason they wanted to hurt Chesabuddin is because he was prosecuting cops. Because he was the first district attorney in at least 60 years in San Francisco ever to file criminal charges against a police officer for killing somebody improperly or for assaulting someone improperly. And the Police Officers Association considered that completely unacceptable. And so they did everything they could to damage him, including not solving crime so it would look like there was more crime. And it was Chesabuddin's fault. I think some of that trend has continued. Right? The police chief, if he were here today, would say, we don't have enough cops. We need between 300 and 600 more cops. We're understaffed. Right? San Francisco has more police per capita than many similar sized cities. Again, if the chief were here, he'd say, yes, but the tourists. And you might say, yes, but there aren't quite as many tourists as there used to be. Nevertheless, I personally believe it's a question of priorities. The cops don't like getting out of their cars and walking a beat and being around the community, right? They don't. They like being in their car, separated. And I'm saying this in a sweeping way. I know cops. I have at least one friend, two friends actually, who are cops, who are really wonderful people and are really trying to make a better San Francisco and really trying to help people. I believe that the majority of the San Francisco police officers do not want to get out of their cars and do not want to be part of the community and do not want to walk a beat, do not want to do things that are difficult like that. If I believe, and this is something Gordon Marr has been talking a lot about in District 4, if we had more police presence, if we had more cops walking down the commercial corridors and not zipping by in their cars and waiting for a call, we might not only see less crime, but people might feel safer. Now, I'm saying that in one way. Really, there are two kinds of folks in this city, and one Some people feel safer when they see a cop on the street, and some people feel less safe when they see a cop. All right. And I'm saying that with all due acknowledgement that for a lot of people, seeing a cop on the street does not make them feel more secure. It makes them feel afraid. And that is a totally legitimate point of view. On the other hand, I do think that this is a question of police priorities. You know, it's interesting. I'm an inveterate agenda reader. I always read all the agendas of all the upcoming meetings at City Hall. And this is how I spend my weekends. This is how I spend my Saturday afternoon, you know, watching the baseball game and reading the agenda. And I was looking at the agenda for the Rules Committee this week. And one of the items on the agenda, and I'll be writing about this in 48 Hills, but one of the items on the agenda is approval of AB 481, which basically is a state law that says that when the cops buy fancy military equipment, the city has to approve it, right? So, city's supposed to approve all their fancy military. Well, included in the agenda is a list of all of the stuff that they've got. And I'm looking at this, and they've got this basically armored anti-tank vehicle that's got this, it's got an 11-foot battering ram on it, and it's got this device that basically looks like a fire ladder, except it's really wide. It's got this huge device that lifts up 2 stories that allows a bunch of armed cops, and they've got pictures of this when I looked it up online. It allows like armed cops to assault the 3rd story window, right? With this special thing. All right, this thing costs like $500,000. All right, why do we need that? Why do we need one of those? I mean, I know that the cops think it's really cool and they got this boss tank vehicle that, you know, but why do we need? So I do think that there are priorities in the police budget that we could look at. Why do the cops need to spend like millions of dollars every year on what we call propaganda? The San Francisco Police Department has a very large, what they call communications department, but they're not really communicating with a lot of you, obviously. They're spending it on promoting the police department. Anyway, it's a very good question. And I say that, you know, having more cops in the community is a good thing for those people who feel safer when there's cops in the community. Yeah.
Hi, thank you very much. One way to get with the cops out of normal thing, I belong, my district is the one over on 6th Avenue. And weekly, they have an email that blasts out, and part of that is, you know, hey, here's our next coffee with a cop, and they give an address and a time where you can go sit down and have coffee with some of the cops in the neighborhood. I don't know if other precincts do that, but that does happen out in where I live. My question is, first of all, thank you very much for being here. I've been lucky enough to see you give this presentation numerous times, and I thank you very, very much for it. Usually you have a website, and perhaps I missed it in the beginning, but are you going to talk about, do you still have that website where you were talking about these issues? And if so, what is it?
Yes,
Thank
okay,
you.
absolutely. Okay, there's 2, all right? I was for many years the executive editor of the San Francisco Bay Guardian. 9 years ago, the San Francisco Bay Guardian was sold because the people who founded it and built it up had basically run out of money. It was sold to the company that at that time owned the San Francisco Examiner, which has since changed hands. Shortly after it was sold, I was summarily fired. In fact, I got an email at midnight one night saying my resignation had been accepted, which was very interesting. At any rate, I, at that point, started 48 Hills. 48 Hills, 48hills.org is a website where we discuss San Francisco politics, arts, and culture on a daily basis. It's a daily newspaper, 48hills.org. We came up with the name because there's some dispute on this, but according to the US Geological Survey, there are 47 named hills in San Francisco. But in the social justice movement, there's always one more hill to climb. So we called it 48 Hills. But through a little bit of fascinating contract work, when the Bay Guardian was shut down, I was able to regain rights to the San Francisco Bay Guardian, which if I had $50 million, I would be publishing as a weekly newspaper, but I don't. But the San Francisco Bay Guardian can do endorsements. And I was hoping to print an endorsements issue this year, but I couldn't sell enough ads to pay for it. The price of newsprint has gone through the roof in the last 3 years. 5 years ago, it cost me about $6,000 to print 25,000 copies of the Bay Guardian. This year, it would have been $12,000. And the ad money just wasn't there. At any rate, but we did endorsements online at sfbg.com. There are detailed endorsements explaining our positions on all of these issues. There's also they still say clip out guide. It's a printout guide that you can look at. And we always used to say, we still did it here because it's old. We're still old fashioned. Clip out guide, take this to the polls. Nobody goes to the polls anymore, right? But you can print this out on your computer. It's actually very easily printable, or you can just look at it. And this gives you the snapshot of all of our endorsement recommendations if you haven't voted yet.
Yes, I appreciated your arguments about YIMBY and the problems with YIMBY. Did that include, you really focused on Measure D. Did you include Measure E in your as well?
Yeah, Prop E is the competing measure to D that was put on the ballot by Supervisor Chan. And Prop E actually streamlines real affordable housing. And because Connie is smart, I really like Supervisor Chan. Because Supervisor Chan is very smart. If Prop E, if they both pass, Prop E supersedes Prop D. So if both of them pass, D goes down and E takes effect. Yep.
Thank you.
Oh, hold on, you got to use the mic.
Yeah, just.
Since you seem to have the answers to many of the questions that otherwise some of us don't have the access to getting the answer to, one of the things I'd like to ask you about is I had just heard from a friend that KGO fired all of their talk show hosts. What was the reason for that entire firing?
As far as I can tell, it's about money. KGO for years was the #1 rated radio station in San Francisco. And people tuned in because, they liked Ron Owens and like some of the other people, they liked talk radio. And I'm old fashioned. I like talk radio. But it's changing. Interestingly, I teach journalism at University of San Francisco. And one of my students last semester said to me, oh, my dad's in town. Can he come I was teaching journalism 1. She said, can my dad come to the journalism class with, and I said, of course, absolutely. And she said, he's in journalism in DC. And I said, oh, that's great. Well, my classes, of course, your parents are always welcome in my class. I hope he enjoys it. And it turns out that he's not only in journalism, he's the head of NPR. So, and I love NPR. So the head of NPR comes to listen to my class. And I said, well, look, you're here. I mean, my God, I've got the head of NPR in my classroom. Come on up and talk to us. Tell us what it's like being the head of NPR. And he said the scariest thing that happened to him when he became the head of NPR is he saw the listenership data. And the listenership data was that the median age of a listener of NPR was 60, and it was going up every year. And basically what he said is, in 20 years, we're not going to have any listeners, which is why he started all of the NPR podcasts and all these other NPR things that appeal to younger listeners, which have been very, very successful. Okay. The reason I say that is I believe that fewer and fewer people are listening to talk radio or mainstream talk radio, not right-wing Rush Limbaugh talk radio. I think that audience is dwindling too. And I think that basically the owners of KGO, which is it's a big national company, decided they weren't making enough money. So they fired all their hosts and they turned it into sports gambling. Now it's sports gambling talk radio. Prop 27. Gee, pretty soon we're going to go on the radio and they're going to tell me who to bet on in the middle of the game. Right? So I think it was financial, and it's really sad because I really liked KGO talk radio, even when I didn't always agree with the host, because it wasn't Rush Limbaugh. It was like reasonable people having reasonable discussions. Yeah.
I think we have one question from the Zoom, and then we'll probably wrap up after that. We need to end the meeting at 10:45. So a couple of people have raised questions or made points about the public defender's race.
Oh, yeah.
Manu Raju or Rebecca Young. Someone has commented that Manu has been destroying Jeff Adachi's legacy of representing the neediest clients. So what comments do you have about that?
Okay. I will say from the start, I like both of these folks. I've always liked Manu, and I thought he's done a good job. And I like Rebecca Young a lot, and I think she was an excellent public defender who did some incredibly good work in the juvenile division when that was her job. The argument seems to be that under Manu, the public defender's office has veered away from a mission of simply defending indigent clients and has moved some resources, not a lot, but some resources into doing, for example, criminal justice policy work. And when I talked to Manu about this, he said, if I don't do it, no one else will. No one else is doing this work. And representing indigent defendants is not just about going in the courtroom. It's about getting laws changed and changing policies and changing the way we think about the criminal justice system. And that is also part of my job. Rebecca disagrees. And she thinks that the resources should be put entirely in putting people in the courtroom to represent indigent defendants. You know, I've always respected both of these folks. Rebecca, her campaign has really not gone anywhere. She hasn't gotten a lot of support or a lot of endorsements. It hasn't really taken off. And I think that Manu will get reelected pretty handily. But I think, and I will honestly say I couldn't understand why she ran in the first place. I didn't understand why she, and this is the best I've been able to understand of what the disagreements are. And I do not think that this is not, I mean, people who say he's destroyed Jeff Adachi's legacy, I don't think he's destroyed Jeff Adachi's legacy. I think he's still done an excellent job with the public defender's office. I think these are legitimate policy differences, and I'm glad to see Rebecca run and raise these questions. But as I say, I don't think her campaign is really going anywhere.
Another question, Tim, about Laguna Honda Hospital. Have you been following that? And if so, what do you think about what's going on there? And if people want to chime in with the Board of Supervisors, there's a hearing on November 1st on the future of Laguna Honda Hospital.
Yeah, it's a really, really complicated question. And part of this, I will say, and I'm going to be honest here. I don't blame everything that's wrong with California on Gavin Newsom. But this is partially his fault, right? Gavin's folks are the ones who went in and created the situation where the feds would stop giving Medicare reimbursement to Laguna Honda. Laguna Honda can't exist without the federal money. Right? Now, the state investigators came in and said Laguna Honda isn't meeting certain standards, and that created a furor, and the state said, and the federal government said, now we're not going to give you any money, which basically means the hospital would have to close down, which means many of the people who are currently there would have no place to go. Some would become homeless, some would die. I mean, I'm being blunt about this, right? This cannot happen. And the idea that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who is from San Francisco, would allow this to happen is just disgraceful. There are problems at Laguna Honda. There are problems at any big public hospital like that. Some of the problems stem from the fact that the Department of Public Health, understaffed, without enough place to put people. Laguna Honda has traditionally been a hospital and rehab facility for older people. And that's what it's traditionally been. But there have been some younger people, some of whom have mental health challenges, who have been moved from SF General to Laguna Honda because there was no place else to put them. This has caused some problems. Right? There have been instances with, I think, mostly younger people smuggling drugs and alcohol into the hospital. Right? I don't really see the 85-year-old people with physical or mental disabilities smuggling weed into the hospital, but maybe I'm wrong. I think it was some of the younger folks. These are not critical problems that the hospital should be shut down over. These are symptoms of an overloaded, understaffed, overburdened public health system, and they can be addressed. And I think the supervisors are trying to address this. I think the Department of Public Health is trying to address this, and I think that we will. It's just that why on earth would Gavin Newsom and Joe Biden threaten to shut down this hospital and terrify so many vulnerable seniors? I mean, when you tell vulnerable seniors that they're going to be moved out of their room to someplace 100 miles away where their family can't see them, and I mean, it's traumatic enough when you're a senior. Moving is traumatic enough. When you're in a hospital, in a convalescent hospital, and you're told you're going to be moved, that's really traumatic. When you're going to be moved away from your family, it's incredible. Why on earth would they do that? I just can't believe that Gavin Newsom and Joe Biden would let this happen. They're going to solve those. These are not insoluble problems. This is not a crisis at Laguna Honda. This is not a disaster. These are mild problems that can be solved. Anyway, that's my thought.
One last question. That's an insoluble problem, but what about the fentanyl problem here now in the city?
Oh my God, it's horrible.
Oh, I know, but I mean, I know this is not necessarily an election question, but who on the Board of Supervisors is are there studies on this?
Yeah.
I mean, what
yes,
is?
good question. In fact, Supervisor Dean Preston, a couple of months ago, asked the health department at a public hearing, what is your overdose prevention plan? Where is it? And they didn't have one. So, I mean, literally, I watched the hearing. It's like, can you show me the overdose prevention plan? And they said, well, we don't really have one. But now they do. And now they're working on this. And it is a very difficult, complicated problem. I personally am a big fan of safe injection sites. I believe that what we need to do, the first thing we need to do is to create safe spaces in San Francisco where people who are addicts, who are using IV drugs, can come in and safely inject drugs with a clean needle. And, I've heard Vitka Eisen, who's the director of Health Right 360. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but Health Right 360 is a drug treatment facility. And Vitka says that she was a heroin user. And she said 9 times she went to the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic for overdose treatment. And 9 times they were really helpful and nice to her and they saved her life. And the 10th time they convinced her to go into rehab. And that was 25 years ago, and she's been sober since, and she now runs Health Right 360. What she says is, if you die, you never have a chance to recover. If you die of an overdose, you never get into recovery. And the first thing to do is to keep people alive. And that's why she's a big supporter of safe injection sites. We had this. I will give Scott Wiener credit for this. He got it through the state assembly and the state senate. We had a bill that would legalize safe injection sites in San Francisco and save lives. And Gavin Newsom vetoed it because he's running for president and he doesn't want to be the Democrat who legalized heroin in San Francisco. Right? Gavin Newsom vetoed that bill that would have saved thousands of lives and helped us address the fentanyl epidemic. And he vetoed it because he wants to run for president. I can't believe it. I still can't believe it. I personally think the city should just do it. Just open it up. Who's going to prosecute? What are they going to do? What is the state attorney general going to prosecute us? Rob Bonta's not going to do that. What is Joe Biden going to send federal troops in to arrest the mayor? Not going to happen. Anyway, that's my opinion.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming today. Let's have a round of applause. Wonderful information. Thank you, Tim. And we'll see you soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.